All right, we should be live as we speak.
خلاص.
And assalamu alaikum out in the chat, everybody. And send them the link. How's my audio? Audio is good from my side? Assalamu alaikum out in the chat.
Let me just mute this here on YouTube. Let me share the link quickly. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
نعم. So I've shared the link. Let's maybe wait a minute, I guess.
Yeah, give everybody a minute. So inshallah, we'll be starting from Bab. Today we'll be starting from Bab Siwaak. Okay, that's good. There's some nice narrations and some good fawaid in these abwab.
Alhamdulillah.
A little bit of, we pick up a little bit of usul here as we go as well.
Inshallah.
And then Bab al-Masah al-Khuffain. And then we get into the heavy stuff. نعم. طيب إن شاء الله.
خلاص.
You know what? If you want to go ahead and share that same link in the other group as well.
Which one?
Can you do that? Share it in the brothers group.
The Masjid al-Iman brothers?
Yeah, might as well.
Yeah, that's a good idea too. I did share.
Nice.
Maybe when I can share the Umdat Ul-Ahkam, like the page link or the page the group for the page. So maybe some people could join too.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Francisco and Yasin.
Okay, inshallah. Bismillah.
No. Should I go?
Yeah, bismillah.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وبعد. باب السواك. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: لولا أن أشق على أمتي لأمرتهم بالسواك عند كل صلاة.
جميل. طيب. So, عن أبي هريرة عن النبي, for the chapter on the siwak. Siwak. And siwak is a general reference to cleaning the teeth. Siwak is a general reference to cleaning the teeth. عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: لولا أن أشق على أمتي لأمرتهم بالسواك عند كل صلاة. لولا أن أشق, had it not been too big of a burden, had it not been a big burden upon my ummah, I would have ordered them with the siwak at the time of every salah. At the time of every salah, meaning before every salah. Okay, so here it means before every salah. So لولا, this is called harf imtina' liwujud, meaning that the obligation or the order is not given. Okay, لولا أن أشق means he's not ordering us. Okay, he's not ordering us to do this action, which is the siwak, at the time of each salah. Harf imtina' liwujud. Imtina' means to prevent, preventing the existence of. So the wujub is not there in this situation. Okay?
No.
And this goes back to the qa'idah. Well, what was the qa'idah now that we probably mentioned a couple of times? Or I don't know, maybe we didn't mention this qa'idah. But there's a qa'idah, which is what? أن المشقة تجلب التيسير. Okay, anytime there's a mashaqqa, anytime there's a difficulty, the difficulty should bring about or bring on an ease, a taysir, right? أن المشقة تجلب التيسير. Okay, so from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that the deen is made easy. لا يريد الله بكم العسر. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not ordain and will difficulty upon you. So the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when the order of the Prophet, for, of course, is it is legislation in the Deen, right? So
نعم.
the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, had it not been a difficulty, I would have ordered it. I would have liked to order it. However, this Deen is something that is easy, and it's not something that's made difficult upon you. Okay. Uh, However, now the mashaqqa here, as with many things, we have to recognize that everything has some level of mashaqqa in it, right? And somebody say that the salah has mashaqqa, therefore the salah has a burden in it, therefore I'm not going to pray, right? Because Islam is easy, and we have a qaida here that if there's a mashaqqa, we should take ease instead,
نعم.
right? No, and some people use this type of thought, and they say it's Islam is easy, it's not complicated. Allah makes things easy. Allah is merciful. These are the types of things you hear from people. So that doesn't apply when the order is there, right? That doesn't apply when the order is there. If the order is in the Quran and the Sunnah, then we
نعم.
cannot take a general rule over what?
Specific.
Over a specific command. Okay? The am is never given precedence over the khas.
الصلاة.
Okay? That's another rule. The am is never given precedence over the khas. The khas is always muqaddam ala al-am. The khas is always given precedence over that which is general. So the rule here is a general statement, okay? And if we have a specific order, the specific always applies before any generality, general principle, and things of that nature. And everything has some mashaqqa in it. Salah has mashaqqa in it. Siyam has mashaqqa in it, right? Does that mean we cancel it out? Of course, we don't cancel it out. Okay? So the siwak itself that's mentioned it's a general reference. It can be to any type of what was used as far as the branches or the specific branches that were used to clean the teeth. It can be a reference to all of them. The one that's specifically mentioned is the one that comes from the arak tree. Okay, this is the specific one that is mentioned. The arak tree, that was the specific branch or twigs that they would take to use for the siwak. Okay, now the Prophet ﷺ saying عند كل صلاة, okay, shows that there's a particular istihbab, there's a particular preference to doing it at the time of the salah. Okay, at the time of the salah. And there's a narration, there's a narration from Imam Ahmad that mentions مع كل وضوء. So in the narration, the similar narration that comes in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, he says مع كل وضوء, with every wudu.
With every wudu.
That's a narration from Ahmad. The narration here from Bukhari and Muslim, عند كل صلاة, before each prayer, at the time of each prayer.
So with
Okay,
wudu,
so these now.
so with wudu, would you do it before, or you could do it in between while doing the wudu, right?
Well, you wouldn't want to do it while you're in the midst of the wudu, because of course it's not from the pillars or the or even the sunan of the wudu, but before or after. Before or after. Perhaps before would be more preferable. Okay, so there's an istihbab at the time of salah with wudu. There's an istihbab, and there's other things that are mentioned as well that we'll come to. Okay, and this, of course, and here the Prophet ﷺ said, "عند كل صلاة." This is what? This is the general statement. So this also includes the salawat in Ramadan,
نعم.
right? Because there's a small opinion. There's an opinion that's not a strong view, that it's actually one of the views in the madhab of Imam Ahmad, that during Ramadan you should only use the siwak up until dhuhr time, for example, and not beyond that time. Okay, so this is not a strong view. Here we can use the generality of a hadith like this to say, no, with every salah. The Prophet ﷺ didn't make an exception here.
No.
He didn't say, with every salah except for dhuhr and asr during Ramadan. He didn't say that. So the generality here includes the salawat, and this could be, somewhat of a refutation of those who assume that you can't, clean your mouth or brush your teeth or use the siwak while you're fasting during Ramadan.
No.
You were going to say, Abdullah?
I was saying, so it would include the janazah prayer as well, right?
Janazah prayer, in the generality of doing it all the time. Yes,
نعم.
and in the generality of the statement, عند كل صلاة لا بأس. No
صحيح.
harm in considering that to be the janazah prayer as well. نعم. Mu'tasim, I read Malik say that no one from Ahlul Ilm found it strange during the day in Al-Muwatta, like second last narration in the book of fasting. It's not true that nobody found it strange. Yani, there is a view in the madhab of Imam Ahmad that you should not do so during the later part of the day when you're fasting. Okay, but again, this is not a strong view. It's not a strong view. Yeah. طيب, so that was hadith number 19. Let's go on, inshallah, to the next narration. Let me scroll down here on the screen.
عن حذيفة بن اليمان رضي الله عنهما قال: كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا قام من الليل يشوص فاه بالسواك.
جميل. عن حذيفة بن اليمان قال: كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا قام من الليل, meaning what? If he
would awaken from sleep.
When he would awaken from the night,
The night.
from the night, يشوص فاه بالسواك. يشوص means to wash or clean. To wash or clean. He would clean his mouth with the siwak. He would clean his mouth with the siwak when he woke up at night. Okay. إذا قام, إذا تفيد الاستمرار. إذا, it gives us like a continuity, meaning that he did it all the time. Okay. إذا قام, when he woke up, he did such and such. So it was his habit to do this action all the time. Okay. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when he would wake up, so here we have another istihbab. It's preferred, it's liked to use the siwak when a person wakes up from their sleep. Okay. And it was known that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ disliked تغيير رائحة الفم, when the having bad breath, the changing of the smell of the breath. The Prophet ﷺ, he disliked that. Yeah. So he would do, whatever was in his control to have, pleasant breath and avoid having bad breath, bad smell. Yeah. Mu'tasim, how about sending salah on the Prophet? Is it sunnah to use the siwak before sending the salah on the Prophet? There is no narration that mentions that, that particular time, but in the generality, if a person was going to sit down to say the adhkar, for example, let's say before, after Fajr or after Asr, for example, and they use the siwak before doing so, فلا بأس, لا بأس, because it's a generality. It's mustahab all the time to use the siwak. But a specific mention about using the siwak before sending the salam and the salat and the salam upon the Prophet, as far as I know, there's no dalil for that. Francisco, could we use the miswak first and then brush the teeth? Or is brushing the teeth fine as well? If you do the miswak as well, this would be great. And if you did the miswak and then brush the teeth, excellent. Why? Because with the miswak that comes from that particular tree or those particular types of trees, then we're fulfilling a sunnah. As far as fulfilling the sunnah of washing the mouth and having good breath and not bad breath, then we would accomplish that by brushing our teeth. But if we added using the actual siwak, then we're fulfilling that specific sunnah. So this is even better than just brushing the teeth. No. If you don't need to brush your teeth if you use the miswak, inshallah, maybe use some toothbrush with the miswak. لا بأس. No, inshallah. Miswak can do the job. We met some elders before, and they had, for many years done nothing but siwak, and they were maybe in their, old age, 70s and 80s. Mashallah, they had all of their teeth. So, inshallah, the siwak alone can do the job. Now, okay, we'll move on. Inshallah, Hadith 21.
نعم. عن عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت: دخل عبد الرحمن بن أبي بكر الصديق رضي الله عنهما على النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وأنا مسندته إلى صدري، ومع عبد الرحمن سواك رطب يستن به. فأبده رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بصره، فأخذت السواك فقدمته وطيبته، ثم دفعته إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فاستن به. فما رأيت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم استنى استنانا أحسن منه. فما عدا أن فرغ رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم رفع يده أو إصبعه، ثم قال في الرفيق الأعلى ثلاثا، ثم قضى. وكانت تقول: مات بين حاقنتي وذاقنتي. وفي لفظ: فرأيت ينظر إليه، وعرفت أنه يحب السواك، فقلت: آخذه لك. فأشار برأسه أن نعم. هذا لفظ لبخاري ولمسلم نحوه.
جميل. عن عائشة she says رضي الله عنها دخل عبد الرحمن, her brother عبد الرحمن ibn Abi Bakr, her brother, came in while Rasulullah صلى الله عليه وسلم وأنا مسندته إلى صدري, while the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم was leaning against my chest. When was this?
Before he passed away.
This was before he passed away, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This was during his last days of life. So he was weak. He was leaning up against her chest, somewhere between her neck and the shoulder and the chest area. He had his head laying on her, radiyallahu anha, wa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And Abdul Rahman, he came in with a siwak. ومع عبد الرحمن siwak رطب. The siwak was fresh and it was soft. يستن به, he was cleaning his teeth with it. فأبده رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بصره. So the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم extended his basar, his sight, to it. She could see that the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم was looking at it. Now he was too weak at that time to speak. Well, so she could see that he was looking at it, and she understood that he wanted the siwak. صلى الله عليه وسلم. فأخذت السواك فقضمته. She says, so I took the siwak and I chewed it. She was softening it up for the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم. فطيبته ثم دفعته إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. So I gave it to him. دفعته, I gave it, I presented it to him صلى الله عليه وسلم. فاستن به, so he cleaned his teeth with it. فما رأيت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم استنى استنانا أحسن منه. And she says, I didn't see him, I never saw him brush a brushing better than this one. Okay, so look, subhanallah, يعني, well, we'll come to the fawaid of the hadith. فما عدا أن فرغ رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم رفع يده. No sooner was he finished brushing his teeth, cleaning his teeth with the siwak, رفع يده, he raised his hand, أو إصبعه, or his finger. He raised his hand or his finger. ثم قال في الرفيق الأعلى. And she heard him say, with the highest companion, ثلاثا, 3 times. ثم قضى. And that was the moment that he died, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So now here, this is happening according to some narrations on the 12th of Rabi' al-Awwal. Okay, so if we go back a little bit, at Fajr time, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was too weak to go out and lead the salah. Okay, and he's in Aisha's bed, radiyallahu anha. Abu Bakr is leading the salah. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he asked to sit up in the bed at that time. He asked for help to sit up. So he sat up, being held up. He lifted the curtain. Of course, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's room is what? It's attached to the masjid, right? So he sat up, he was able to sit up and lift the curtain, okay, which separated his house from the masjid, and he looks inside the musalla. And the Sahaba at that point, they hadn't seen the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ for 2 or 3 days. So when they saw his face, they were in salah. So Anas, he said that we were about to break our salah in happiness. They thought the Prophet ﷺ was well again. So he said when we saw him, he was smiling into the musalla, and we almost broke our salah. You could imagine, yani, they saw the face of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam looking in through the curtain. They're so happy. He's sitting up, he's smiling at us. But then Anas later on, he reported, and that turned out to be the last time we saw the face of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Naam. So that was the last time this was, according to, yani, Allah knows, the more prominent view. It was on the 12th of Rabi' al-Awwal, on a Monday, and it was the 11th year after the Hijrah. Okay, so and then his fever became more and more severe at that point. Other things took place, yani, but and then, and then that's when Abdul Rahman came in. This is now maybe around Dhuhr time. He comes in. He has the siwak. The Prophet ﷺ is going in and out of consciousness. The fever is very high. And then Aisha, in one narration, she heard the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he was saying, مع النبيين والصديقين والشهداء والصالحين. She said, I had to come close to him because he was almost just whispering it. And 3 times I heard him say, مع النبيين والصديقين والشهداء والصالحين, with the Anbiya and the Siddiqeen and the Shuhada, the martyrs, and the Salihin. And he said, he made the statement, في الرفيق الأعلى, with the highest companion. And that was, of the last, that was the last thing that came from him, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and he passed away. Now, وكانت تقول مات بين حاقنتي وذاقنتي, and she used to say that he passed away between my حاقنة and my ذاقنة, meaning the حاقنة would be like the lower chest area, and the ذاقنة, the throat. Okay, so either between like her neck and, shoulder, upper chest, or it could be like between the chest and the throat, basically. That's where he had his head, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وفي لفظ فرأيته ينظر إليه, and the other narration, I saw him looking at it, meaning the siwak. وعرفت أنه يحب السواك, and I knew that he loved the siwak, so she took it. فأشار برأسه, and so she asked him in this narration, أخذه لك, should I take it for you? He indicated yeah, and na'am, with his head, and she took it for him. Okay, so what do we understand from this hadith? Yani, some of the fawaid we can take from it. The ulama, they said that we see the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, until the last moment of his life, he's doing ibadah, right? He's worshipping Allah, and he's doing the thing that he knows is beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In one hadith, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said, السواك مطهرة للفم مرضاة للرب. He said that the siwak is purifying for the mouth and pleasing to the Lord. Okay, so until his last moments, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was doing an act of worship. Similarly, the believer should always be looking for a way to please Allah in everything that he does. And everything that he or she does should be looking for, how can I please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What type of ibadah? What can I do in this situation? Look, until the last moment of his life, the last thing he did was brush his teeth, and with the siwak. And she said, I never saw him brush the teeth so well, despite his weakness, and in those last moments. Okay, the ulama, they mentioned, like, it's permissible for a man to, for example, be leaning up against his wife or whatever, even if a family member like Abdul Rahman came in. It's still permissible in that situation if a family member was there, for a person to be leaning against the wife or close to the wife. فَلَا بَأْس, there is no problem in front of a family member. Okay. Permissible to use somebody else's siwak as well. Okay. لا بأس, there's no harm. Something doesn't become disliked. For example, it's not disliked to drink from somebody else's cup. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ used to pass a cup around. He would drink and pass it around to the Sahaba. No? So it's not disliked in any way to share a cup, to pass a cup around, to use a miswak that somebody else has used. فلا بأس, there's no harm in doing this. Okay. Now, if there's somebody sick or something like that, or you feel that there might be a sickness, then of course you take the precaution. But in general, it's permissible. It's permissible. Okay. The Prophet ﷺ, he said in a hadith that's also narrated by Bukhari, إنه ما قبض نبي حتى يرى مكانه في الجنة, that no prophet is taken until he's shown his place in Jannah, meaning at the time of his death a prophet is shown his place in Jannah, فيخير بين الجنة وبين بقائه في الدنيا, then he's given the choice to return to Allah or to remain in this world. So when Aisha heard the Prophet Muhammad saying في الرفيق الأعلى, with the highest companion, she knew that he had chosen to go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. نعم. طيب, there's one more hadith about the siwak, inshallah.
عن أبي موسى الأشعري رضي الله عنه قال: أتيت النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وهو يستاك بسواك رطب، قال: وترف السواك على لسانه وهو يقول أع أع، والسواك في فيه كأنه يتهوع. نعم.
عن أبي موسى الأشعري قال: أتيت النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, I approached the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم وهو يستاك بسواك رطب, he was using a siwak that was soft or fresh. قال: وطرف السواك على لسانه, he said طرف is the tip of something. Okay, the tip of the siwak was على لسانه, was on his tongue. لسانه. وهو يقول أع. When he says or, he means like a noise as if he was almost going to throw up, right? Like if you stuck your finger towards the back of your mouth into your throat, you would start to make this type of noise, or as if he was nearly going to throw up. والسواك في فيه, while it was in his mouth, كأنه يتهوع. يتهوع means that it was as if he was going to throw up. Another word for tahawwur is taqayyu. Taqayyu means to throw up. That's another word for it. Okay. Some people used this hadith to say what? That it's not bad manners for a person to use the siwak around people. Okay. So this is not something that's like considered not having manners or bad akhlaq, for example. If you're using a siwak around other people, فلا بأس, there's no problem in doing that. Okay. Other than that, we learn from this hadith that the siwak can and should be used also to clean the tongue. He was cleaning the tongue so thoroughly that he was nearly going to throw up like this. So he was thoroughly cleaning his entire mouth and the tongue and everything like that. طيب, let's move on inshallah.
باب المسح على باب المسح على الخفين. عن المغيرة بن شعبة رضي الله عنه قال: كنت مع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في سفر، فأهويت لأنزع خفيه، فقال: دعهما فإني أدخلتهما طاهرتين، فمسح عليهما. نعم.
So we enter here the chapter باب المسح على الخفين, wiping over the two khuf. The khuf, what is a khuf? A khuf would be like a leather sock, okay, that was used as a means of walking and being outdoors and walking around. They would use this. It would like a thick leather, mostly made of leather sock that they would wear in place of a shoe, more or less. Okay, so عن المغيرة, he says قال: كنت مع النبي, I was with the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم في سفر, during travel. فأهويت لأنزع خفي, so I went down. فأهويت, I went down to the ground. لأنزع خفيه, to remove his khuf, to take off the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم's khuf. فقال: دعهما, so the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم said to me, leave them. فإني أدخلتهما طاهرتين, because I put them on, I entered into them, meaning I entered my feet into them, طاهرتين, while my 2 feet were pure. فمسح عليهما, and he then proceeded to wipe over the khuf, okay, as part of his salah. Okay, so regarding the hadith, the يعني Al-Mughira, he says, we were traveling with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. يعني most often the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam traveled either for what? What were the purposes of travel? If they were
الله.
traveling, they may have been traveling for jihad. Okay,
نعم
they may
هذا.
have been traveling for jihad, or uh, to fulfill a hajj or umrah.
That's pretty much
Right?
it. There in
That's
terms.
pretty much it. So we don't have dalil that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ traveled for any reason other than that after the beginning of prophethood. Okay? We know before the wahi came to him that he would travel for business as a merchant, as a trader, but we don't have proof that he did so after the wahi descended upon him. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And however, we know, of course, the Sahaba did do that. The Sahaba did travel as merchants and to trade. Okay, so they were either traveling with him for jihad or to fulfill the Hajj or Umrah. Okay, uh, so يعني, is it permissible to travel for other reasons? Of course, it's permissible because the asl is that the default is that it's permissible to travel for, as long as the travel itself or the purpose of the travel is halal, then it's permissible to do so. Okay, فأهويت أن أنزع خفيه. So I went down to take off his khuf. In here we see that it's permissible to help somebody else to take off the khuf, make wudu, bring water. All of this is permissible. But notice from this hadith what? The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he did not ask him to do that. Okay? So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was not asking people, take off my khuf, do this, do that. No, that never happens. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he wasn't asking people to do that. But but if they did do it, he didn't prevent them from doing it. Okay? Why? Because there's a reward in them for helping the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and he didn't want to prevent them from that reward. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he didn't like to prevent them from achieving the reward that they would achieve by serving the Prophet ﷺ, and that's not decreasing his reward in any way. Okay? So he didn't prevent them from doing so, although he would not ask them to do so. Okay? Okay, and the masah, of course. Okay, so he mentions yani he had made wudu previously and he had put the khuf on while he was in a state of tahara. So this is of course a condition for wiping over a khuf, is that a person has to have put them on while he was in a state of tahara. Okay, uh, the Zahiriyya and I think the Ahnaf, they make the condition that that person has to have washed the foot, then put that khuf on, then wash the other one and put that one on. Okay, they make this condition. يعني, however, يعني this is the Prophet ﷺ, he simply mentions فإني أدخلتهما طاهرتين. I put them in while I was in a state of tahara. So he didn't make this like extra condition or anything like that. Okay. Now, of course, the question would come up: what about the socks, right? Because the khuf is mostly what's mentioned. Did they have jawrab? Okay, the jawrab is not mentioned in any authentic hadith about the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So socks are not mentioned in any hadith that's authentically reported from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. However, it is narrated about Sahaba. So we do have authentic narrations about Sahaba. Ibn al-Mundhir, he says the jawrab was, yani wiping over the jawrab was reported about 9 of the companions of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. I believe Ibn al-Qayyim said 12 or 13. Okay. So the jawrab, there was no, one of the ulama, one of the scholars, he said there is no difference amongst the companions about the permissibility of wiping over the jawrab or the sock. There's no difference. I believe it was Ibn al-Qayyim. He stated that there's no difference reported that the amongst the Sahaba about wiping over the jawrab. So, yani, between the qiyas and the amal of the Sahaba, this is sufficient for us to say that it's permissible. The Sahaba understood the ruling this way, and the maqsad of the hukum is there. Wiping over the leather, was the point that it's leather or polyester or cotton? No. The point is that if you put on your footwear while you were in a state of tahara, then it's permissible to wipe over. We have narrations that the Prophet ﷺ wiped over the na'lain, the shoes, right? So he wiped over shoes and he wiped over khuf. Okay, so the issue, because some differentiate between the khuf and other than the khuf, and they say only the khuf. However, no doubt that the dalil is stronger, that wiping over the socks is equally acceptable. It seems to be an ijma' amongst the Sahaba. Okay, so this is very strong. طيب. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, he made the condition that it should be thick. It should be thick, not very thin. Either way, a thin type of sock was most likely not known at that time. Most likely, it was not known or didn't exist. Like a really thin sock wasn't known at that time. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, he said that it should be thick. It should be a thick sock. What is the difference? How thick? Allahu alam. But for the most part, wiping over the socks that we have today is permissible, and there is no harm in doing so. Why do the Hanafis limit to leather only? Because they say that what is mentioned in the ahadith is the khuf, and a khuf is a leather sock. Okay, so that's why the Ahnaf say only the leather sock, because a khuf is a leather sock that was worn as a shoe, and that's what's mentioned in the hadith. So that's why they say that. However, as we explained, that it is narrated from the companions. Why don't they take that? Allahu alam. I don't know what type of istidlal, or how they explain the ruling. I know that the Ahnaf only consider the leather sock, the khuf. Exactly why, and why they don't allow wiping over the jawrab, I couldn't tell you exactly why. Yeah. طيب. So we established that. Let's go on to the next narration here. 24.
باب المذي وغيره.
No, there's one more, isn't there? One more.
حذيفة بن نعم. عن حذيفة بن اليمان رضي الله عنهما قال: كنت مع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فبال وتوضأ ومسح على خفيه مختصرا.
جميل. So another hadith here عن حذيفة ibn al-Yaman. He says, كنت مع النبي, I was with the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم. فبال, so he urinated, وتوضأ, and he made wudu, ومسح على خفيه, and he wiped over the khuf. Okay, so while renewing the wudu, the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم, he wiped over the khuf. Okay, so wiping over the khuf, some of the scholars, they asked the question, which is better, to do the fresh wudu or to wipe over the socks or the khuf? Okay, and some gave a good explanation, saying that if you weren't wearing, let's say for example, you don't have any socks or khuf on, you shouldn't put them on just so that when you go to make wudu, you will wipe over them. Okay, meaning that if you weren't wearing anything on your feet, then you should remain that way and make wudu that way. But if you were wearing them, then it's better to wipe over them rather than take them off and not wipe over them. Okay, and what is not mentioned here in these narrations is the time specified, which is 1 day for the resident and 3 days for the traveler. Okay, so this is an important bit of information as well, is that the resident can wipe over the socks or the khuf for 1 day, 1 whole day, 24 hours, 1 day, 5 salawat, and the traveler can do so for 3 whole days before he has to make a fresh wudu. So a person in a state of travel, for 3 days he can wipe over his socks or shoes until he needs to make a fresh wudu. And of course, the condition is that they have to have, whatever you're wiping over has to have been worn while you were in a state of wudu. Has to have been worn while you were in a state of wudu. Yasin, we can wipe over shoes if it fits the condition. Yes, you can wipe over shoes. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he wiped over his shoes. It's permissible to wipe over your shoes as long as what? You put them on while you had wudu. As long as you wore them while you were in a state of wudu, then you can wipe over them as well. And there's no harm in doing that. However, keep in mind that, let's say, for example, you had socks on, okay, and you lost your wudu while you had those socks on. You put those socks on while you had wudu, and then you lost your wudu while you had those socks on. Then you go and wore shoes while you were not in a state of wudu at that time. In that situation, you can wipe over the socks, but you cannot wipe over the shoes. Okay, because you didn't wear what? The shoes. So the shoes don't meet the condition that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, فَإِنِّي أَدْخَلْتُهُمَا طَاهِرَتَيْن. I wore them while I was in a state of tahara. So whatever you wore while you were in a state of tahara, you can wipe over. But what you put on while you were not in a state of tahara, you cannot wipe over. Okay? So important to make that differentiation as well. Jameel? Let's take one more. We'll start this chapter because this is a long chapter. So we'll take one narration and inshallah we'll stop with this. Next narration from Babun fil madhi wa ghayrihi. Madhi, of course, is a pre-seminal fluid or discharge, a lighter discharge, not mani, okay? Not sperm. It's a lighter discharge. Okay, so what if it has holes? Yasin, what if it has holes? The stronger view, and Allah knows best, Sheikh bin Uthaymeen said that it's still permissible to wipe over them, even if they had holes. And he said that no doubt the Sahaba had holes in their khuf, as it was narrated about some of their garments that they wore. Their clothing would have 70 holes in it, or many lots of holes in the clothing. So no doubt, if the person only owned one garment and only owned one khuf, no doubt there was going to be holes in it. This doesn't prevent that they wiped over it. Wallahu alam. Sheikh bin Uthaymeen explains it this way. Let's go on to this next hadith.
باب المذي وغيره. عن علي بن أبي طالب رضي الله عنه قال: كنت رجلا مذاء فاستحييت أن أسأل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لمكان ابنته مني، فأمرت المقداد بن الأسود فسأله فقال: يغسل ذكره ويتوضأ. وللبخاري: اغسل ذكرك وتوضأ. ولمسلم: توضأ وانضح فرجك. نعم.
جميل. So the first hadith here عن علي ibn Abi Talib. He says قال كنت رجلا مذاء. I was a person who had this. Madha means I would have madhi, I would have discharge of madhi. Okay, I had discharge of madhi, pre-seminal fluid, or a discharge that's not sperm, it's not madhi. Okay, madhi. So I had this issue. فاستحييت أن أسأل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لمكانة ابنتي مني. So I was shy to ask the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم أن أسأل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Why? لمكان ابنته مني. Because of the position of his daughter with me. He was married to the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم. Right? So he was shy to ask this question himself. فأمرت المقداد ابن الأسود فسأله. So I ordered Al-Miqdad ibn al-Aswad to ask the Prophet ﷺ. فقال يغسل ذكره ويتوضأ. The Prophet ﷺ said, let him wash his private part and make wudu. Okay, let him wash his private part and make wudu. In the other narration, اغسل ذكرك وتوضأ. It comes in صيغة الأمر, wash your private part and make wudu. ولمسلم توضأ وانضح فرجك. Make wudu and wash or clean the private part. The only difference is the order, whether it's wudu first and then washing it. In the first two narrations, wash it first and then make wudu. Okay, so this is the ruling for somebody that has that type of. This applies also to what's called incontinence, somebody that has like a drops of urine that uncontrollably come out from time to time, right? So this applies to that situation, which is called incontinence, or any type of discharge in reality, any discharge other than mani, other than the sexual fluid, the thicker sexual fluid that comes with desire and arousal and the climax and all of that. Anything other than that, the ruling is that you clean your private part and make wudu and make the salah. You don't have to make ghusl in any of those situations. We see in this hadith that there's no haraj in asking these questions. This is knowledge. This is ibadah, and there is no haraj in asking these questions, except for the fact that Ali, because he was married to the Prophet's daughter, he didn't like to ask this type of question, right? He didn't like to ask this type of question that has to do with the discharge in the private part and things like that. But he still sent somebody else to ask the question. So it shows that there is no haraj. When it comes to knowledge, there is no haraj. Islam covers everything for us. How we clean ourselves and discharge and all of these issues are covered. And there's absolutely no haraj. There's no shame in speaking about these issues at all. Okay? جواز العمل بنقل الفتية. And this is a hadith that they mention, they use, and others like it, about the permissibility of relaying a fatwa or relaying knowledge, right? So here you have what? The narration of one, which is an ahad narration. So the fact that Al-Miqdad relays the fatwa, you can say the fatwa. The fatwa comes from a scholar, but from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, it's not called a fatwa, because the Prophet said whatever comes from him is wahi and it's legislation. So it's not called fatwa. However, the relaying of the knowledge by one individual to another individual is sufficient to establish the ruling and to establish the authenticity and to build even belief on and aqeedah upon. This is the minhaj of Ahl Sunnah, that the narration, even if it comes from one, as long as it's authentic, as long as its chain is authentic, even if there's only one person on each level of the chain, that's sufficient for us to build a belief or a hukm upon. Okay? And here, this is one, you can use this as dalil, because there's some that they reject the narration of the ahad. There's some that reject the narration of the ahad. They say, no, it needs to be mutawatir. The sunnah is not sufficient for us to take rulings from. La, the Sahaba used the narration of one to establish ahkam. And who's better than Ali ibn Abi Talib when he uses the narration of one person here? Who's going to come and have more understanding of how legislation is established than he was, right? So narrations like this one and others can be used as proof that the ahad hadith or narration is sufficient for us to establish a ruling. Okay? The Sahaba were, no doubt that the Sahaba were, there's ijma' amongst the Sahaba about that. There's ijma' amongst the Sahaba about that. Okay? So we'll go further into the rulings about the madhi and discharge, and istihada works the same way for a woman. Istihada, any discharge other than hayd, all she needs to do is what? She should make wudu at the time of salah and make salah. So somebody who has a continuous discharge, when the time of salah comes in, then they should make wudu at that time and pray the prayer. Okay, they wait for the time of the salah, or right before they're going to pray, make wudu and pray if they have a continuous discharge. And then they don't have to worry about it at all. So even if there are still droplets of urine and it's uncontrollable for this individual, he has no control over it, it's sufficient for him to make wudu right before the salah and pray. And even if he had some drops of urine during the salah, this doesn't break his salah, nor does it nullify or invalidate his salah. Jameel? طيب. So we'll stop with that for today, inshallah. Any questions here?
Have you come across the statement? I can't recall. I thought I read from Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. He said that in incontinence, right? That's what it's called. It happens due to person, like for example, the man touching his private part constantly. Wallahu a'lam.
Touching the private part constantly could cause some discharge, right? Like pre-seminal fluid and things like that. But the incontinence is considered a condition that a person has.
صحيح.
So it's a condition that a lot of people have. I mean, it's not something that's very uncommon. It's somewhat of a common type of condition. So yeah, so mostly when it comes to the urine droplets, it would be more of a condition. If you talk about like the pre-seminal fluid, the madhi, then it could be affected by
صحيح.
somebody touching their private parts too often. Wallahu
صحيح.
alam. Yeah.
I think Mu'tasim said something. No, that's it.
You
Anyone?
heard that some books of the Hanafi madhab, that Abu Hanifa changed his opinion near his death. Yeah, this would not be uncommon that the ulama, they changed their opinions. This is known amongst the scholars. And Imam al-Shafi'i, he changed many of his rulings when he traveled from Iraq to Egypt. So the scholars, yani, they would change their opinion if new dalil came to them, right? If a new dalil, or you're talking about he changed his opinion about what? About wiping over the socks? Is that what you're talking about? Hold that it's allowed to use a sock. نعم نعم. Keep in mind that even the madhahib, they developed over time. Yani the rulings within the madhahib, there's ijtihad that went on over time. So not necessarily what you find the ahnaf upon now is what is every view of Abu Hanifa. Rather, yani there was ijtihad that took place in the madhab from one generation to another. So what you find the people who follow a particular madhab upon now isn't necessarily what the imam uh, uh, was upon necessarily. And there can be differences of opinion within the madhahib and various views within the madhahib. That's why we always try yani, our approach should be that we first try to learn the fiqh from the dalil. So we attach ourselves back to the dalil itself. We learn fiqh from the hadith. Then when we need to, we go and look at what the ulama they said. We go back to see how did Imam Malik and Shafi'i and Abu Hanifa understand the adillah. But first, we should attach ourselves back to the dalil and learn fiqh from the sunnah, from the ahadith themselves. Because unfortunately, many times when you look in the books of the madhahib, you find you find the entire madhab explained with hardly any dalil mentioned. You find they'll tell you the 12 shurut of wudu are kada, and then the pillars are kada, and then this. Okay, now the shurut of salah are such and such. Then the pillars of salah are such, and then the sunan of salah are such, and hardly any dalil is given in those summarized books of the madhahib. So no, rather we should learn the fiqh from the Quran and the authentic narrations. Then when it's necessary, when something's unclear, then of course we turn back to the great scholars to see how do we understand the dalil. Now, but not the other way around, where we take the opinion and we never go back to the dalil. No, that was never the approach of the Salaf. I heard excessive caffeine, lack of water. Oh, طيب. Allahu A'lam. Could be. Attack these fuqaha, saying they ruin fiqh. Allahu A'lam. Allah knows. Wouldn't happen much. Wallahi, the Hanabila, yani the Imam Ahmad, he didn't allow anybody to write down his views. While he was alive, he never allowed people to write it down. They didn't write it down until later. That's why you find a lot of ikhtilaf in the madhab of Imam Ahmad. Sometimes in a mas'ala you find 3 or 4 or 5 opinions in one mas'ala. Because he didn't allow the writing of his views during his lifetime. That happened later on. Yeah? Wallahu a'lam. طيب إن شاء الله we stop with that. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. Wasn't there a statement of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal about not taking Maliki al-Awza'i anyways fatwa, but rather what they made the fatwa? نعم, there are similar statements from all of the ulama. Take خذوا من حيث أخذوا من حيث أخذ. Take from where we took, they would say. Don't take our view, take from where we took. Right? And if our view yani, opposes a hadith, and throw my view against the wall. And there's a good introduction to this in very simple form for Sheikh Albani in Sifat al-Salah. In the introduction of Sifat al-Salah of Sheikh Albani, he kind of explains and he brings some of the aqwal of the scholars of the madhahib and these type of statements. Take from where we took. If my opinion contradicts the authentic hadith, throw away my opinion. My opinion is the authentic hadith, they would say. Whatever the authentic hadith is, that's my opinion. Right? So they were against people يعني, taking their views over hadith or anything like that. نعم, Sheikh Albani's book صفة الصلاة.
I gave the same book to Umar before he left to Medina.
ما شاء الله, ما شاء الله. طيب إن شاء الله, بارك الله فيكم, جزاكم الله خير. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all. Inshallah, we'll see you soon for the next one, inshallah. Hopefully, if we keep moving at a pretty good pace, we can get to the abwab on Siyam and Ramadan before Ramadan, inshallah. So that will be nice.
Barakallah fikum.
Fikum barak. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.